Our Flickr browser app's coming along nicely, and in the process we've covered a lot of techniques that you'll find useful in your own apps. So it's time now to extend the Flickr browser to display a photo full screen when the user taps it. Now we're going to need some way to detect that an item in the recycler view was tapped. We also need to know which item was tapped. Now, one consequence of Google's simplification of the recycler view is that it no longer has an easy way to set an on-click listener. Now, there are a number of methods for detecting when an item in the list is tapped, and a common method is to implement the RecyclerView.onItemTouchListener interface in a class. Now, we're going to do something similar, but we're going to extend the RecyclerView.simple on item touch listener class instead. Now, Google have created this class so that we don't have to implement methods of the interface that we won't use, and also to future-proof our apps against changes to the recycler view. Now, there's two interesting links I want to share with you. Firstly is the Google documentation on the on item touch listener interface. Let's have a look at that. So if you decide to implement the interface, that's a good starting point. Now that page contains a link to the simple on item touch listener, which is this one here. You can click on that and check that out as well. So both of those are well worth reading. And they mentioned at the start that extending this class is useful if you don't want to implement all the methods of the interface. Now they also guarantee to always provide a default implementation in this class if things do change so that existing code won't break. So for that reason alone, it's worth considering extending the simple onItemTouch listener class rather than implementing the onItemTouch listener interface, and that's what I'm going to do here. Now, if you want to use an interface, the approach is very similar to what we're going to do. In fact, the class constructor and functions we define can be used unchanged. You just have to override another couple of functions even if you don't use them. Now, before we get into the code, there's also another way to do this that's actually pretty neat. And I just want to draw your attention to a pretty cool article. I'm just going to bring that up on the screen. All these links, as normal, are in the resources section of this video. And that actually gives you another way to do it. So it could be cool if you want to investigate another approach. Now, the first bit of code on this page shows what adding the listener looks like. And you can see that down here. And once you've created the class, it's actually quite easy to add the listener to the recycler view. So you may want to look into that further if you're using a lot of recycler views in the same app. But for this app, we're going to extend the simple class. So let's get started with that. All right, so back to Android Studio. We need to create a new class. So as per normal, we're going to right-click the package name, new, Kotlin file class. I'm going to select class as the kind, and we're going to go with the name RecyclerItemClickListener. That's RecyclerItemClickListener, and we're calling it that name because that's essentially what it is. All right, so for starters, we'll start with the usual tag for logging, private val tag equals 2 double quotes recycler item click listen. Now, once again, be very careful with the length of the tag. Remember that you're actually only allowed 23 characters, so that's why I'm abbreviating that at the end. Now, all the approaches to implement a recycler listener use a callback mechanism, which is the usual way of notifying an activity that something's been clicked. So consequently, we need to define an interface that we can call back on. We're going to call ours the onRecyclerClickListener. So let's implement that, or create that rather. So interface onRecyclerClickListener. Then we want left and right curly braces, and the two functions will be fun on item click, and then parentheses view colon view comma position colon int, and the second function will be fun on item long click parentheses and same, so view colon view position colon int. So that's our interface. So basically these two functions, that we've defined are for callbacks. On item click to respond to a normal tap on an item, and on item long click if the item's long tapped. Now our class is going to need to know what to call back, which we do by providing a listener in the primary constructor. Now we've done that a few times now. And we also need a context for the gesture detector to work and a reference to the recycler view that we're detecting the taps on. So we're going to add those parameters to the constructor as well. Let's go up and do that. So we're going to change that now to parentheses after the recycler item click listener, context, colon, context, comma, recycler view, colon, recycler view, and obviously capitalization is important here, comma, private val listener, colon, on recycler click listener. And on the next line, just to make a bit of space here, I'm going to put colon, and we're going to return a recycler view dot simple on item touch listener, parentheses. Okay. So we've seen the listener used a few times to store the object that will be calling back, but what's this gesture detector all about? So far we've responded to simple taps on widgets such as buttons or the list view. Now Android provides a load of ways that a user can interact with apps, including things like long tapping, swiping and drawing patterns. Now these are all handled by a gesture detector. So I'm going to use the gesture detector compat class so that our app's compatible with earlier Android versions. Now you can find the reference documentation on the gesture detector class by Googling the class name. Now Google also provide a training document which will come up in the search results. If we go over and just have a quick look at that, go to Google and we'll search for gesture detector. You can see this first option up here, we'll click on into that. So if you want to know more when you come to write apps that use more complex gestures, then you'll find what you need to get started in these links. And I'm pushing the documentation a lot because frankly you can't be a successful developer without taking full advantage of all the resources available on the internet. Things are changing so fast and there's just so much that Android can do that you just can't learn all of it. The trick is to learn what you need when you need it, building on what you know about how the Android classes work and how Android itself handles things. Now we started writing the Java version of this course, which was based on Android Nougat, at around the same time that Samsung started deploying Marshmallow on their devices. Most devices out there were still on Lollipop or earlier, so that means that we were using a version of Android that was 2 versions further on than most devices. So working in an environment that's changing so rapidly, frankly, we'd be completely lost without access to all the information that Google and others make available. Alright, so back to Android Studio. So this RecyclerItemClickListener class extends the simple on-item touch listener. I think I said earlier that it actually returns it, but it's basically extending it. The recyclerView.simple.onItemTouchListener. And we can override the onInterruptTouch event function to intercept all touch events that happen on the recycler view. So the function will be called whenever any sort of touch happens, whether it's a tap, a double tap, a swipe, or whatever. So I'm going to get the code generator to override the onInterceptTouch event function after our interface declaration and then log the method call. And we're extending a class here, by the way, not implementing an interface. So I'm going to come down here after the interface declaration and do a Control-O. So we want to override the onInterceptTouch event, which is this one here. So I mentioned I'm going to add some logging, so we'll do that. So log.d parentheses tag comma double quotes dot onIntercept touch event colon starts $e. So let's leave it at that for now and connect this listener to the recycler view in main activities on create method. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up. There's our on create. So first we're going to make main activity implement the onRecyclerClickListener interface so that we can pass the activity rather than using anonymous classes. Now we did that before when we used the main activity as the listener for the buttons in the YouTube app. So this line is going to get a little bit long now, so I'm going to split it up. So we've got class main activity, and we've got our app compat activity. We've got our on download complete. So let's go to a new line there. Put on get Flickr JSON data on data available. We need to add the next one now, so we'll put a comma and go on to the next line, and it's going to be RecyclerItemClickListener dot on RecyclerClickListener. Now we need to implement the two functions, and obviously main activity wants us to do that now, and that's what it's complaining about. So let's get the generator to create the stubs for those two functions after the onCreate method. We'll just do it down here. Control-I, we're going to select both of those and click on OK. So let's also add some logging to both, and we'll also add a toast message as well so we can see what's going on. So firstly, on item click, log.d, parentheses, tag, comma, double quotes, dot, on item click, colon, starts. Then we want toast, dot, make text, parentheses, this, comma, normal tap, at position, dollar position. And then we want to put a comma after the double quote, toast, dot, length short, parentheses, dot, show. And for the long click, we're going to put log.d, parentheses, tag, comma, dot, on item, long click, starts. And then we'll do a toast dot make text, parentheses, and it's going to be this again, double quotes, long tap, at position, dollar position. Then we'll do a comma, toast dot length short, closing parentheses dot show. Okay. And obviously now Android Studio is happy that we've implemented those two functions. So all that's left to do now to see our click events is to create a new instance of our RecyclerItemClickListener class and add it as a touch listener to the Recycler view. So let's do that, and we'll do that up here. Well, actually what we'll just do it immediately after the linear layout and before we actually set the adapter. So I'll put it on here, so it's Recycler_view dot add on item touch listener, parentheses, RecyclerItemClickListener, parentheses, this, comma, Recycler_view, comma, this, and the two closing right parentheses. And in case you're wondering with the two thises here, we're passing it as both the context, because it's an activity, and the listener, because we've implemented the required interface. Now, before running the program, I'm going to comment out the logging of getItemCount in the Flickr Recycler View adapter, just to keep the log count a little bit clearer. We know that's working now anyway, so there's no need to continue logging it. So let's comment that out, like so. And also, we don't need to log the photo details either in onBind view holder. So let's actually comment that out as well. That's this line here. All right, so let's open up Logcat, and I'll clear it, and let's run our app. All right, so I'll just let it start, and making sure now that you can actually see Logcat, which we can. I'm going to click once on the app in the emulator, and when we do that, we should actually see the onIntercept touch event method being called twice. And you can see that onIntercept touch event was called twice there. Now, whenever you interact with an Android screen, there's actually quite a few events generated. Now, here the function's being called when it detects the touch, but also when the quote-unquote finger is lifted off the screen, or mouse in my case. So in other words, we're getting two touch events for each tap. Now let's try clicking and holding the mouse button down for a long tap. So I'm going to do that on another one. And I'll just do that again. So I'll hold it down. You can notice that there was one, and then when I released the button, it went again. So I'm going to do it again, do a long tap this time, There's the one event. I'm holding the mouse button down. When I release the mouse button, we see the second event. It's also interesting to see what happens when I scroll and fling the list. So when I scroll, notice that we're getting an action down. I'll just move this over a little bit more so we can see that a little bit more clearer. And I'll just do it again so we can see. So notice that we're getting some action down. We've got an action down followed by a series of action moves. And then finally there's an action up when I release the mouse. And that's the equivalent of lifting my finger off the screen on a real phone. So if I do a bit of a fling here, well, that should result in the same sequence of events, just much faster. Like so. So when I scroll, we get an action underscore down action followed by a series of action underscore move events as I scroll. And you can see that happening now as I'm slowly scrolling. Then I release the mouse button and we get the action up again. So there's loads of touch events being generated as we interact with the screen. Now obviously we can't go trying to display a full screen picture on all of them. In fact, it's quite easy to break things. So let's make a change to the function in the listener to see how. Now in the onIntercept event in the RecyclerItemClickListener class, I'm going to return true instead of returning the result of the call to the super method. So in other words, I want to comment that out. Then on the next line, I'm just going to put return true. So if I stop that and run it again, and I'll open up the logcat as well. And now when I click, we still get two method calls logged, action down and action up. Now if I hold the mouse button down, we still get a single call, then the other when I release it. Now I'm not sure if you'll be able to see this too well on the video, but if I try to scroll, I'm trying to scroll as I did earlier in this video, nothing's actually happening. I can't actually scroll, and we're getting those event actions as you can see over here. So we're still getting the action move after the down event, just a single one as you can see, but the recycler view is no longer scrolling through the list. So in other words, we're not getting any more action moves either as we got previously, just the single one. So what I've done here by using this return true is intercepted the touch event, then told the system that we've handled every single event. In other words, that tells Android that nothing else needs to handle these events, which is what happens when we return true. So if we handle a particular touch event, then we can return true so that nothing else tries to handle it. But if we don't handle it, then we have to return false so that whatever else is listening can do its stuff. In fact, if we don't return false, we should return the result of calling the super method, because that gives anything else that's listening for events a chance to respond. So as you can see, this is far more complex than responding to simple clicks like we did with buttons or the list view widget, but it's starting to make sense. This approach that the Android framework is taking makes the recycler view far more flexible than the simpler list view. So we can now intercept touch events and we can let the system handle the ones we don't want to deal with. So that just leaves us with one more question. How do we decide which ones to deal with? Well, that's where the gesture detector comes in. So I'm going to stop the video here, and in the next video, we'll see how to use a gesture detector. See you in the next video.